everybody. Welcome to Davis Shakespeare Festival's Desdemona Pre-show. My name is Aggie Woodbury. I'm an intern at DSF and the dramaturg for Desdemona. I'm here with Professor Stephen Wittek, a scholar of early modern drama at Carnegie Mellon, to talk more about the context behind Toni Morrison's Othello adaptation, Desdemona. So, Professor Wittek, I'd love to hear a bit more about your background and your interests.
Hi, thank you. First of all, it's a real pleasure to be with you today, Aggie. Thank you for inviting me to do this. As you said, I am Professor Stephen Wittek. I teach in the Literary and Cultural Studies program of the English department at Carnegie Mellon University, and I am a Shakespearean. And more broadly, I work on early modern drama, so Shakespeare and Thomas Middleton and Ben Jonson and people like that. I also have a foot in media studies and the digital humanities. I have a project right now on Shakespeare and virtual reality, and I wrote a book about intersections between drama of Shakespeare's age and news culture. So,
this might be a biased question to ask a professor of Shakespeare, but does Shakespeare's work translate to today's audiences?
It's often said that Shakespearean drama has a universal quality to it, by which people sometimes mean that it has this almost quasi-mystical or magical property, that it's always going to be meaningful and important to all people across all time, forever, in a way that sets it apart or makes it greater than other sorts of literature. I wouldn't go that far. I mean, one of the great things about Shakespeare is that he's dealing with big problems of the human condition, and he never ever takes easy answers to do with politics and religion and gender and human equality and what makes human beings human. In that sense, I think there is a lot there in Shakespearean drama that certainly found meaning in it. But there are lots of equally great authors and examples of sophisticated literature out there. Toni Morrison is one of many possible examples.
Yeah. So have you taught Othello as a professor?
Aggie, I avoided it for a long time, not because it's dark and edgy. I think it's part of the responsibility of a Shakespeare professor to try and break through the common perception that people have of Shakespeare. The reason I've sort of shied away from Othello a little bit is because, first of all, I always thought, well, if I'm going to do it, I've got to really do it and put reading around it and make sure that I'm actually situating this material in a responsible way and opening up a thoughtful, constructive conversation with students that isn't just reproducing hatred and the darkness that is in the play. And also, I've just always found productions of Othello devastating in not a comfortable way for me. At the end, my God, you get this terrible image of this gigantic black man turning into a monster and just completely brutalizing this defenseless spouse, Desdemona. And she's completely helpless and weirdly complicit. It took me a while to go ahead and teach the play. So I've only done it once.
Mm. And were there any conversations that you remember from your teaching of Othello that stood out to you?
Yes, lots. I learned a lot. I'm glad I did it. I learned a lot from my students and their responses to the play, as I often do. A lot of those conversations centered on the character of Desdemona. If you read Othello next to plays such as Macbeth, as we did, or maybe Antony and Cleopatra, Desdemona, I think, can let people down a little bit. Because here we have, you look at Lady Macbeth, I mean, certainly not entirely positive portrait of femininity by any means, nor is Cleopatra, but it's a dazzlingly interesting and fully worked out character with a robust psychology and inner life, and it just really comes off and especially if you compare it to a lot of other drama of the period, or even of our own drama of our own period, it's the kind of role that actors die for, right? Like, oh, wow, to play Lady Macbeth, that's great. Such a full, great role to have. And the same is for Cleopatra. Desdemona, she's more in the same box as somebody like Ophelia in Hamlet, right? She's there to be a victim. She's not such a well-rounded character that she's there for Othello to act on, that she is there to embody and maybe even promote these very, very regressive ideas of femininity or what a woman and a wife is supposed to be, rather than working against those kind of ideas.
In interviews with Toni Morrison, she says that that was her impetus to writing this show, is that Desdemona, she's portrayed as so helpless. This show really gives her a voice in that way. So is there a difference between the Desdemona that you see in Toni Morrison's production versus the one that we see in Shakespeare's?
Yeah, certainly. I think that's the point. Morrison's Desdemona is a response to Shakespeare's Othello. One of the things about Othello that is unique is it has this legacy of appropriations along the same lines of sort of thing that Morrison is doing. Part of what Morrison wants to say is, in fact, Desdemona, yeah, maybe there's problems with this character, but if you look closely and maybe imaginatively, there is more there. There are interesting questions there that could be developed and investigated. And that's certainly what she's done with this play. And I think an important part of that is Desdemona isn't just a cardboard cutout. There is, in Shakespeare's Othello, this interesting contrast between, yes, it's true, she's a victim and she's complicit and she's disempowered at the end of the play. But the play begins with her making this really interesting agential move, right? She is a character who has chosen to marry Othello, sort of an outsider character, a character of color, as a way of escaping patriarchy. So in that sense, she's also empowered and empowering at the beginning anyway. So I think what Morrison's doing is she's looking at those two aspects of Desdemona, right? Empowered and empowering, but also complicit and disempowered. And she's saying, well, there's something interesting there. Let's dig into that a little bit deeper.
And in Morrison's show, we get to see conversations between Desdemona and Othello after her death in this nebulous liminal space. So do you think that Morrison's portrayal of Othello is different as well, or provides more nuance to Shakespeare's portrayal?
Yeah, well, first of all, I'd say I think Morrison is primarily interested in Desdemona and less interested in the character of Othello. That seems obvious, and even less interested in the character of Iago, right? So, in Shakespeare's play, Othello is at the very, very center, and a lot of it is about the Othello-Iago dynamic. Morrison radically just kind of undoes, she's doing her own thing. She's mostly interested in Desdemona. And, she makes a lot of changes to Othello, which is fine. I think it's Morrison's play. She's not claiming to be making an adaptation. I don't subscribe to fidelity criticism, which, says that any interpreter of Shakespeare's works has to follow what they believe to be Shakespeare's intentions. My God, she's Toni Morrison. She can do whatever she wants. So I'm not this. And I preface it with that because I don't want it to seem as though what I'm saying is in any way a criticism of Morrison. Just to say, I think her Othello is different. In lots of ways, just a completely different person than the person we see in Shakespeare's play. And maybe part of that difference has to do with what Othello looks like when Desdemona moves to the center rather than being on the sideline.
How would you compare the tone of Morrison's language versus Shakespeare's? Both are very poetic, but seem to be in very different ways.
Yeah, they're completely different. Again, Toni Morrison doesn't feel any obligation to play by Shakespeare's rules. It's through and through a Toni Morrison play. So it's a lot shorter. Shakespeare's Othello is working within a 5-act structure. It's written primarily in iambic pentameter and in verse. It involves all sorts of subplots, and one real key distinguishing feature of the tone that Morrison takes has to do with this setting in whether it's an afterlife.
Well, this was a really great conversation.
That's it.
Yeah,
thank you.
I'm so excited about the content that we got out of this. Thank you so much for joining us today. And for every audience member sticking around, I hope you enjoy the show after this. Thank you so much, Professor Wittek.
My pleasure. Thank you very much, Aggie. We'll see you. Best of luck with the show.
Thank you. Thank you.